You're listening to a CNA podcast.
It did take everyone by surprise. It took me by surprise too, because all of a sudden he just came out on TV late Tuesday night saying that he had no choice but to take
Talk about K-drama, a martial law decree that lasted just 6 hours, an impeached president, an impeached acting president, and the first ever arrest of a sitting president who has since been indicted for insurrection. Well, for the past 2 months, South Korean politics has been eventful, to say the least. Our Korea correspondent has followed the string of developments every step of the way.
For more, CNA's Lim Yun-suk joins us from the National Assembly.
The latest developments, CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk joins us live from Seoul.
CNA's senior Korea correspondent Lim Yun-suk has more.
Now, the country waits to find out what happens to President Yoon Suk-yeol as he faces two simultaneous trials, an impeachment one and a criminal case. He has vowed to, quote, fight to the end. What does that fight look like? Correspondent Lim Yun-suk joins me today. Hi, Yun-suk.
Hello. Hi, Teresa.
Okay, I've lost count of the number of live crosses and reports that you have done since President Yoon declared martial law on the night of December the 3rd. You've been covering South Korean politics for decades now. How would you describe these past 2 months?
Well, yes, I have. And, when I meet people these days and they say, wow, Yun-suk, you must have been really busy, I tell them that the word busy is really not sufficient. It's not really the right word to describe how busy and crazy it really has been since that martial law was declared on December 3rd. Before joining CNA, I was, say, in the 1990s, I was working for another foreign media, and I remember covering the trials of two former presidents related to a military coup then. And the image of the two presidents, especially Chun Doo-hwan, the mastermind behind the coup then, really stays, and I think it will forever stay in my mind. It was a very strong image. And so I covered that, but then I also covered former President Park Geun-hye, the first female president, being impeached and being thrown out of the office. And that time he was really busy too. But, what's been happening here in South Korea since December really goes beyond everything I've seen so far. All these unprecedented events just happening one after another from the time that he announced that martial law on December 3rd and then being arrested from his presidential office, his residence on January 15th. I've really been seeing a lot of events I never thought I would see here in South Korea. Things that I would really think might be good for a movie, a drama, but not for real life.
Our listeners may not really have a sense of what you go through on the ground. You've reported from outside the National Assembly, outside the presidential residence, at the site of protest rallies. You're juggling so much. There's breaking news lines, there's camera logistics, not to mention the cold temperature, which is also a challenge. What has been the biggest challenge for you covering Yoon Suk-yeol's story?
Well, I think it's really just being focused, and I think the biggest challenge was really being focused and really just being on alert at all times because things were just happening so fast and I had no idea what was going to happen next. And, I have been around for a while, and so I usually know what to expect sometimes and know what the next step, what the story might be. But for this one, it was really just unprecedented events one after another from day one, and I was at home watching this and I saw this news flash, President Yoon declares martial law, and I wasn't alarmed at first or shocked because I was watching a talk show or something and I thought one of the panelists had said something and they had this flash out as to what he said, but then I realized that this was a news flash and that it was real. And since then, it's really been like that. I think people who know me know how after work, I like to take a break, go out, have a drink to de-stress. But for this time, since December 3rd, I haven't really been able to do that because I don't know what is going to break out, what is going to happen next. And so my team and I, we've been watching the news nonstop, every minute really. And there have been times when in the middle of the night when I would go to the bathroom or get a drink of water or something, and I find myself checking the news just to make sure that something hadn't broken out or something was happening while I was asleep. And also, yes, this was happening when it was the winter, and it still is. It's like -8 degrees here in Seoul today. And many times, my mouth would be so frozen. I wasn't really able to say the words properly. And yes, you do have the hotbacks here in Korea and everything, but it really is cold. And, many times when you're doing the live hits, you're out there a minimum of 1 hour or so because, you need to find the right location, get ready, set yourself up. And that area where the parliament is located is in Yeouido, and it's surrounded by this river, the Han River. And so it gets really windy, especially in the mornings and evenings when we do the live hits. And once you're there in that location, you don't want to move. You can't go to the bathroom and go for a hot drink or anything because it's nearly impossible to get back to that location because there's just so many people. And so the conditions were bad and all that too. But overall, I think it's the waiting game, waiting outside the presidential residence where it's loud music blaring, people chanting different slogans, or outside the parliament when lawmakers were deciding on the impeachment vote. And, sometimes there are times, and lots of times, when you get a lot of the protesters coming up to you and they'll shout insults, not knowing which media you're from. And they say, which media are you from? And they'll say, do your job properly or something. And I would just pretend I don't know a word of Korean, that I wasn't Korean. And I'll say, Singapore TV, Singapore TV. And they would sort of like, oh, she's Singaporean, she's from Singapore. They will walk away. And so lots of events that happen, but overall, it's very stressful.
You make it all look so easy, Yoon Suk. Impeached President Yoon, he's been indicted on charges of leading an insurrection, which means he is facing 2 trials, his impeachment trial and a criminal one as well. Can you tell us how they're different and how he has been preparing for them?
Well, he has the impeachment trials at the Constitutional Court, and this is where the court will have to decide whether his action by declaring that martial law on December 3rd was constitutional or not. That whether as a president he had a right to do that, and if the circumstances seen by the court then make that declaration constitutional or unconstitutional. Now, in the criminal court, it's whether he really wanted to overthrow the government. It's a probe into the insurrection charges, whether he ordered the people, including the former defense minister Kim Yong-hyun, to carry out that insurrection by declaring an unconstitutional or illegal state of emergency when there were no signs of war, armed conflict, or anything similar to that called for this declaration of martial law. Now, the criminal court hearings are scheduled to start later this month, and so President Yoon is going to be very busy having to attend that and the impeachment trials, which are being held every Tuesday and Thursdays, really for the whole day. And he has with him a team of lawyers, about 17 of them, working with them. And I hear that they even met over the long Lunar New Year holidays to discuss the different trials. So he'll be very busy. He'll probably be in court most of the time during the week, but a very crucial, really, trials, both 2 trials that will really determine his future.
Can we focus on the impeachment trial for a second, Yoon Suk? The Constitutional Court, it has begun deliberations on whether to formally dismiss President Yoon or not. How is that going to play out? Do you think it's going to be accelerated because the president is detained right now?
Well, whether he's detained or not, I think they are going at a fast pace. The decision that they will have to reach is whether to remove him from the presidential office or not. Now, about 1 week after he declared their martial law, President Yoon gave a speech to the nation citing his reasons for why he had to declare that martial law. Now, it's a long, sort of like 28-minute speech or so, but let me share with you what he said nearly at the end, wrapping up his reasons for declaring that martial law.
I declared emergency martial law under the president's legal authority to protect the country and normalize state affairs in a catastrophic emergency that paralyzed state affairs. The declaration of martial law is a highly political decision by the president and can only be overturned by a request to do so from the National Assembly.
And he did do that. He did overturn the martial law right after the National Assembly voted against it. But the issue here is whether circumstances surrounding South Korea, the Korean government, a national emergency state, add a national emergency state or not. Now, President Yoon says that declaring martial law was out of desperation, frustration, to let the South Korean public know of what was going on here in Korea, as the opposition-controlled National Assembly had slightly over 20 impeachment proceedings against his officials, was going to cut his budget for 2025, leaving him unable to run the country. And he says that the opposition party was engaging in this, what he calls a legislative dictatorship. Now, also another issue is about sending the troops into the National Assembly. He is alleged to have tried to limit the activities of the National Assembly by sending the troops in and trying to detain some of the lawmakers. And, if that is proven, then that would be unconstitutional here because South Korea's constitution says that a president can enforce martial law to maintain public safety and order in time of war, conflict, or something similar, a national emergency, but cannot limit the activities of the National Assembly. The general feeling here in South Korea is that, many understand the frustration and how helpless he must have been, maybe if what he says was true, but it doesn't give him the right to declare that martial law. So I think we'll have to see what the Constitutional Court decides. It has 180 days from the day that the National Assembly impeached him, and that's December 15th. And, so reports saying that it's possible a decision could come out, say, sometime later this month or early June. And if the Constitutional Court does decide to impeach him, then South Korea will have to hold another election within 60 days. But if not impeached, then President Yoon will be able to return to the presidential office.
So far, we have seen just how vocal President Yoon's supporters have been throughout this saga. Has their momentum waned at all? Where do people in South Korea stand on all this today? Do they sort of want things to just be over and done with?
I'm sure the majority of South Koreans want to sort of get this over with and go on with their lives, especially now that the U.S. has its new president for South Korea to be able to do, and to live. But the supporters are still out there showing their support. They're outside the prison where he's detained, outside the Constitutional Court whenever there's a hearing. And every Saturday, they're still out there in Gwanghwamun where our office is located. There were reports saying that about 3 million of his supporters were out there. Now, in the past, it was very easy to see his opponents, those against him, protesting and calling for him to be removed and ousted. And they, too, are still out there. But it really is surprising how President Yoon's supporters have really grown in numbers and how the approval ratings for President Yoon and his ruling party have gone up since that martial law was declared. Because after that martial law was declared, President Yoon's ratings were like 10%, 15%, but really the lowest for a standing president. And then soon after he made that speech and people were looking into why he declared the martial law, there were people out there and a lot of the young people who in the past were not supporting President Yoon Suk-yeol. And the number of young supporters, they haven't gone down. And let me share with you what one college student, Hong Hyun-young, told me when I went out to one of the rallies and asked her why she was out there in that cold supporting Yoon.
At first, I thought martial law was absolutely wrong and wondered how such a thing could happen. But as I investigated why martial law was declared, I realized that the Democratic Party had been engaging in legislative dictatorship and tyranny all this time. I thought that by adding even one more person like me to this gathering, where the elderly are participating, it could be a way to protect this country. That's why I decided to come here.
And so I think that really reflects many of the sentiments of his young supporters, people who weren't interested in politics before, but now they're curious to know why, and they're out there in the cold and they're supporting him. But then also the majority of South Koreans still believe that what he did was wrong. And so there are still a lot of anti-Yoon protesters out there too who thinks that he needs to be removed and punished for bringing chaos to this country by declaring that martial law. And this is what one protester told me about his impeachment trials.
He was the president of a country, but now, by inciting an insurrection, the nation's prestige and standing have significantly fallen, and its international credibility has been greatly diminished. The exchange rate is rising, and due to these reasons, the country's turmoil must be resolved as soon as possible. It's clear that a crime of treason has been committed.
And so you can see how divided, how very different opinions are out there here in South Korea these days.
Reports say that from his jail cell, President Yoon has vowed to regain office. I'm trying to wrap my head around that idea. Is that just rhetoric? Is it symbolic defiance? How can he possibly make a comeback from all of this?
I really don't think he has a chance. I mean, it might be the hope of his supporters, and I think a lot of them are aware that he won't. But I think, they realize that he won't be able to have this comeback that they want. But, what they also know is that after the impeachment trials are over and President Yoon is ousted from the presidential office, Koreans will have to elect a new president. And this time, many of his supporters and his conservatives say that they will fight to make sure that another conservative leader will run the country and not just give it to the opposition party, as it did when back in 2017, when the main opposition leader, then Moon Jae-in, took over as president following the impeachment and the ouster of former President Park Geun-hye. And that's why I think the conservatives are out there making their voices heard, trying to come together and trying to do something about the next presidential election, because many of the conservatives here that I've spoken to say that back in 2017, when former President Park was impeached, they felt hopeless and they just felt that they didn't have a chance and there was no use trying to win in the presidential election. But many later felt that they just gave in too easily and that they want to make sure that doesn't happen again. Whether they succeed or not, we'll have to wait and see. But that is the feeling. Whether President Yoon can have it come back, I don't think so. But I think it's more of the conservatives wanting to make sure that another opposition leader doesn't just become president because their conservative leader has been impeached.
Since the 15th of January, President Yoon has been at the Seoul Detention Center. That's a government-run jail in the south of the capital. He could be there for up to 6 months as all of his trials continue, Yoon-suk. I have to ask, because I'm sure I'm not the only one wondering, what are conditions there like for him? Does he get any sort of special treatment given he is a president of a country?
Well, I haven't been able to go and see it for myself. We haven't been able to get access to that place, but yes, since January 15th, President Yoon has been at the Seoul Detention Center, and he could be there for as long as 6 months as this trial continues. What we are hearing is that, yes, he is getting special treatment because he is still the sitting president of South Korea. And so he does get his own room. And in fact, some of the lawmakers from the ruling party recently went to see him, and he was cited as telling them that he was doing well and that this facility was also, I quote, a place where people live. And so he seems to be adapting or trying to adapt. And, according to reports, he is in this cell that's about 10 square meters in size on his own. And apparently there's a small desk, a small cabinet. He gets a TV, a bathroom with a sink and a toilet, but he does have to share a toilet outside, the shower outside, though he does have his own time to take his own shower because they don't want any interaction with him and the other inmates inside the detention center. People saying, reports also saying there are no beds, but then, Koreans are used to sleeping on the floors, unheated floors. And so that shouldn't be a big problem. But I think he gets to eat his own meals, have his own time doing his exercises. So he is really on his own. And it's really his contact with his lawyers. It's really the only time that he has any contact with people outside. We're not getting much details, but I don't think it's the kind of luxurious life or cell that he is used to living in the presidential residence.
North Korea, they've been watching this story too, and I saw one report saying their view is that legal proceedings are picking up because of the social upheaval President Yoon has caused. What have you seen in terms of Pyongyang's reaction? Are they using this crisis for political gain at all?
Well, I don't think it has much to gain by reporting on this. And so that's why I think North Korea has been pretty quiet in general, following the martial law declaration. And many experts here also saying that it's probably because North Korea also don't want to take any provocative actions in case it could work in favor of President Yoon, who talked of anti-state forces of North Korea being one of the reasons behind why he declared the martial law. And so Pyongyang has been quiet. It has tested 3 missile tests so far, but many think that that is not a message to South Koreans, but more of a message to the U.S., especially since the newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump is now in his office, than trying to threaten the Korean Peninsula. And also, remember, North Korea has sent troops to Russia to fight in the Ukraine war. And many experts here are saying that Pyongyang doesn't really have the capacity or don't really want provocations on the Korean Peninsula because it doesn't have that capacity to be able to fight 2 wars, one in Ukraine and one here on the Korean Peninsula. And so it's very likely that it will remain quiet, especially when it comes to domestic politics here in South Korea.
And before we go, you have been speaking to me as a journalist, Yoon-suk, but maybe could you take that hat off for a second as you answer my final question here? How has this political upheaval made you feel about your country?
Well, when this first broke out, I think I was just so busy doing my job that I didn't really try to sort of like think it through or trying to make sense of what was happening here. And, we were talking earlier about how I've covered so many major events here in Korea. And I wasn't here during the martial law, when that was declared in the 1970s. And I used to sort of like envy a lot of my senior colleagues, saying, boy, wish I was around then. I missed all the action. But then, I did get to cover this martial law, though it was nothing like what it was back in the 1970s, something very dramatic, which I never thought it would happen here in South Korea while I was a reporter. And I'm happy to be able to be around doing that. But personally, as a South Korean, I'm just really hoping that something good will come out of all of this, because we've seen 2 presidents impeached. And so far since then, in recent years, there's kind of understanding among friends and even family members that we don't talk about politics, because the nation has become so polarized in recent years. And, having different opinions about topics, it all really just boils down to whether you're a supporter of the ruling camp or the opposition camp. And that really determines everything here in Korea these days. And so it's quite scary, even for me. And, and we talk about how South Korea has come a long way to achieve democracy. But for many years, people here haven't really been able to say what they think or they feel about many issues, many opinions, and many feel threatened too, worried that harm will come to them if they do. And so for myself, I've been thinking this through a bit, and I think about these days about what is democracy and what kind of a democratic country, my country, is South Korea heading for as we undergo all of these different events, unprecedented events here in South Korea. So in the end, I'm just hoping that something really good will come out of this and we'll be able to sort of like move forward as a country for myself too.
It is always so great talking to you. You always report on South Korea in a way that makes me really care about what happens to the country and what happens to the people in it. Clearly, this political crisis is not over yet. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today, Yoon-suk.
Well, thank you, Teresa. It's always a pleasure talking to you too. Thank you.
A reminder, you can find Yoon-suk's reports on YouTube and on CNA.Asia anytime. And there are also TV episodes of CNA Correspondent every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. I'm Teresa Tang. The team behind this week's episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, and Craig Dale. A new episode drops next Wednesday. Join us then. Bye for now.